We're going to talk about the lymph organs now. So the lymph organs have a couple of main functions. The first is that they're going to filter lymph, and that's done by the lymph nodes. And the second is that the lymph organs form the basis of the immune system, which remember is one of the major functions of the lymphatic system overall. So the lymph organs we're going to discuss today are the tonsils, thymus, spleen. We're not going to discuss the Peyer's patches or the appendix. Alright, before we dive into each organ, let's first talk about the general components of each organ. So, all the lymph organs contain the cells called lymphocytes. You might remember that the lymphocytes are one of the major 5 types of white blood cells, and they're going to help with fighting against disease. So remember, lymphocytes include T cells, and T cells' roles are to kill foreign cells, and the B cells. The B cells are the ones that create antibodies. In addition, all lymph organs contain a specific type of tissue called reticular connective tissue. Let's look at our first lymph organ, the thymus. The thymus is actually located in the thorax. You'll find it right above the heart, in front of the major blood vessels, the aorta and the superior vena cava. If you look at the thymus really carefully, it actually looks like it has 2 separate lobes, so we say that it's bilobed. And it's actually only active in the youth. Here's the reason why. Its function is actually to help you mature the T lymphocytes. So basically, when kids are growing up, their lymphocytes are not completely mature yet, and so the thymus is there to help the T lymphocytes become mature and completely functional. We call that immunocompetent. So immuno for the immune system, and competent, which means to make it competent, which is to function. So if you were to look at our thymuses right now, you won't actually really find much of it, because as an adult, our thymus isn't functional. But in a kid, you'll see a really large active thymus, and then around teenage years, it'll start to get smaller in size as it becomes less important. Lymph nodes. So the lymph nodes are actually the major lymphatic organs, and they're clustered all along the lymphatic vessel. Their major function is to filter lymph. So imagine them as being kind of like border control. So you have people coming in, and you want to be able to patrol them and see, okay, is this person able to come in or not? Are they acceptable or not? The same thing with lymph. Lymph is filtering throughout your entire body. And because lymph is filtering throughout your entire body, it can pick up bacteria and viruses really easily. So basically, you want to be filtering the lymph and checking to see if everything in there is healthy or if there's anything abnormal. If you do find something like bacteria or viruses, then you're going to need to activate the immune system. Basically, you're going to call in other white blood cells to come and help fight whatever it is that you need to fight. So when this happens, you can imagine that the lymph nodes are actually going to enlarge if they're calling over more cells to help them out. So you might notice that when you go to the doctor and sometimes when you're sick, one thing they might do is they might start feeling around your neck area. The reason why they're feeling around your neck is that's actually where a lot of lymph nodes are located. They're called the cervical lymph nodes. And so the cervical lymph nodes, when you're sick, they can get swollen. So the doctor is checking to see if you have the swollen lymph nodes, which indicates that you're fighting some type of bacteria or virus. There's also axillary lymph nodes. Remember, axillary means near the armpits. So these lymph nodes are also another great area to check to see the condition of your health. In fact, when someone has breast cancer, a lot of times the axillary nodes will get swollen because some of the cancerous cells, if they start to metastasize or migrate, the axillary nodes are the ones that are closest by and will detect them. Alright, let's take a look at the spleen. The spleen is actually the largest lymphoid organ that you have. It's about the size of the fist, and it's in the upper left quadrant of your abdominal pelvic cavity. So if you take a look at the spleen, you'll notice that there's a lot of blood vessels going in and out of it. That's because the spleen itself, major function is to cleanse your blood. It filters through all your blood, and it actually destroys old red blood cells. You might remember that red blood cells only live for about 90 to 120 days. So what happened to these red blood cells after they die? Do you really want them just floating around in your blood? No. So what you're going to do is you're going to get the spleen to filter out these old red blood cells. So it's somewhat like a graveyard for old red blood cells. It'll take out everything you want to recycle, such as the iron, you keep that, and then it'll help degrade the rest of the material. In addition to cleansing your blood, the spleen is an important point for lymphocyte production. So remember, a lot of these lymph organs help with the immune system, and it does so by producing a lot of lymphocytes. Alright, so I've got a true or false question for you guys. If you have a spleenectomy, so that's when you remove the spleen, no other organ can perform the functions of the spleen. So this is actually false. If you have a spleenectomy and remove your spleen, let's think about what organs can do the same thing that the spleen can do. So first, the spleen's job is to filter blood. Can you think of another organ that can help you filter blood? Actually, your liver, right? Your liver is one of the major organs that filter blood. And so if you have no spleen, the liver can take over that role. Now, can you think of another place that can actually produce lymphocytes? So we talked about this before, actually your bone marrow. Bone marrow is a great place for producing blood cells, both red and white. So your bone marrow actually produces lymphocytes. So if you don't have your spleen, you can actually survive. And you have the liver to filter the blood, and you have bone marrow to make lymphocytes. So you'll be fine. Well, not perfectly fine. I did know someone who had a spleenectomy. They had a bad car accident. First of all, if you have an injury to the spleen, it's really, really bloody because remember, it filters through a lot of blood, so it's a high volume of blood in there. But one of the symptoms of having no spleen was actually that the immune system is somewhat compromised because you do have a lower than normal amount of lymphocytes. So this person got sick a lot easier, but otherwise had a pretty healthy life and no other issues. All right, the last organ I want to talk about are the tonsils. So let's think about where the tonsils are located. So they're in your throat. And remember, that's the pharynx. So the pharynx is your throat. And the important thing about tonsils is that they need to fight bacteria. And one interesting thing about them is that they can actually develop a memory for bacteria. So if they see a bacteria, and then later on they see the same bacteria, they'll be more efficient at fighting it. So you might have heard of people getting their tonsils removed. It's not that common anymore, but the problem is that the tonsils need to fight bacteria. And sometimes the bacteria is too strong for the tonsil, so that the tonsils, when they're trying to fight the bacteria, they're calling in for extra help, they'll actually get swollen. If this happens too often and the tonsils are unable to fight the bacteria, they'll remain swollen for a while, and swollen tonsils are not very comfortable, and they can be very painful. So if this is a repeated problem, they might offer to remove your tonsils. Although now it's not as common anymore because of the medicine we have, usually can help fight the bacteria and keep the swollen tonsils down. But it still is an issue. But you can do fine without your tonsils if you do have them removed, because there's lots of other defense mechanisms you have that can fight that bacteria. Alright, so just to summarize the lymphatic system, lymphatic vessels containing lymph bring body fluid back to the blood, so that helps out with your cardiovascular system. And lymph organs, such as the lymph nodes, spleen, and thymus, are composed of lymphocytes, and therefore they form the basis of the immune system.